Acts chapter 14, verses 1 to 7. Paul and Barnabas at Iconium. Let's go to our map here, and we see here Iconium, and we know that they left Antioch, and now they're in Iconium in central Turkey. And it begins in verse 1. Ageneto they in Iconio, kata to avto, iselthin avtus, istin synagogin, ton eutheon. And it came to pass in Iconium, they entered together into the synagogue of the Jews. Synagogue, number 4864, appears many times in the Old Testament and the New, 252 times, in fact. It's usually a synagogue, but many times it's a gathering together. It's a state of what is all these people are together. That's a gathering together. Genesis 1:9, we see the first place that this is mentioned. In Genesis 1:9, we see where God first used this word, and he said, "Let the water underneath the heaven come together into one gathering," a synagogin. Now, the Hebrew might have different words for the gathering and a synagogue. I'm not sure because I'm not a Hebrew scholar, and I didn't check it out. But in the Greek, it's always synagogin, even though it's been translated in places as a gathering. In Psalms 86:15, it says, "O God, lawbreakers rose up against me, and a gathering," there is synagogue, "of strong ones sought my life." So it's not a Jewish church as sort. It's also used as a swarm of bees. So the word swarm could be used for the synagogue hall. I couldn't find it in the Bible. I know it was in one of the dictionaries. In the New Testament, though, it changes somewhat, and it begins in Matthew 4:23, where it says that Jesus taught in their synagogues in Galilee. Then in Matthew 6:2, he says, "You should not be as hypocrites, for they are found being in the synagogues." So on the negative side of the synagogues of these hypocrites being in there, and I suppose the churches may have the same thing, huh? He mentions in Matthew 10:17 the disciples being delivered to synagogues to be whipped. In Mark 1:21, Jesus taught in the synagogue in Capernaum on the Sea of Galilee. In Matthew 1:24-29, it says he casts out a man with an unclean spirit in the Capernaum synagogue. Matthew 3, verses 1-11, story of Jesus healing the man with the withered hand in the synagogue. And then Jesus reads the book of Isaiah in the Nazareth synagogue in Luke 4:16. We're told that a centurion built a synagogue for the Jews in Luke 7:5, who comes to Jesus to heal his servant. And then Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue, his daughter was ill and Jesus raised her from the dead. A synagogue of the diaspora was in Jerusalem in Acts 6:9. And we're told that there were synagogues in the cities or towns of Salamis, Damascus, Iconium, Thessalonica in Greece, Berea, Athens, Corinth, Ephesus. And many in the Corinthian synagogue believed when Paul was talking to them in Acts 18:8, and Crispus, the chief of the synagogue, believed. Apollos, a man who spoke in the Corinthian synagogue, was helped by Aquila and Priscilla in Acts 18:26. And then Paul spoke for 3 months in the Ephesian synagogue in Acts 19:8. But in James 2:2, it's called a gathering. And then we get into Revelation, where it's called the synagogue of Satan in the city of Smyrna, in Revelation 2:9. And then Revelation 3:9, he says, Behold, I give from out of the synagogue of Satan, of the ones saying themselves to be Jews, and are not, but lie. Now, were these people that were not actually Jews, or was this, he's saying here that the real Jews are not ones that are against Christ? That's probably what I'm thinking it is. It continues then in verse 1k, lalise utos, and he spoke thus, oste pistevse iudeon te ke elinon poli plethos, so as for a great multitude of both Jews and Hellenists to believe. So here he's going to the Jews again. The Hellenists are Jews, but they're Greek-speaking Jews from various parts of the world. In verse 2 it continues, but ide apithuntes iudei, but the Jews, resisting persuasion, didn't want to hear it, epigiran ke ekakosan tas psikas ton ethnon, kata ton adelphon. They roused up and afflicted the souls of the ones of the nations against the brothers. So they're telling these Jews that are Hellenists things that against Paul and Barnabas, that they would come against them. Now these Greek-speaking people around that area were speaking Greek for over 400 years, beginning with the invasions of Alexander the Great into many of these areas. In verse 3 it continues, Iconium men un chronon diatripsan parisiazomeni epi to kyrio. And then they spent a fit time speaking openly in the Lord. To martyrunti, to logo, tis haritas, of two, in the bearing witness to the word of his favor. So they're the bearing witness to the word. The word became flesh. Jesus is the word, and we're reading it right here. We are actually taking God in. As we read this, I believe, as much as I could be talking to you in a restaurant, and you would be taking me in, I would be taking you in, we're listening to each other. This is what's happening here with God. God is coming into us and us into him, I believe. A bearing witness to the word of his favor. Favor, number 5484, an interesting word. Genesis 6:8 at first appears in the Bible, but Noah found favor before God. God found favor, and so the result of a favor is you do good things. When somebody is favorable, if they're the opposite, you're less likely to help them and give them things that they need. The saying, if I found favor before you, then so-and-so do this and that, in asking God for something. If I have found favor before you, many places in the Old Testament that structure appears. In Genesis 39:4 it says, and Joseph found favor before his master and was well-pleasing to him. And now, that we would be found favorable to God and he would look on us with favor. And that's a good thing to have happen to a person, and rather than his anger, which would be sort of the opposite, or disdain. Now the word favor doesn't appear in the books of Matthew and Mark, strangely, but then in Luke it appears many times. It starts in Luke 1:30 where it says, fear not, Mary, for by the angel, for you have found favor with God. She is going to have a child, Jesus. Luke 4:22 it says, and all bore witness to him and marveled over the words of favor going forth from out of his mouth. Now the favor going out of Jesus' mouth was seen, and the words of favor, I believe, were good words for a person to hear. It's something that we need to hear. It's wonderful. John 1:16, it says, and from out of his fullness we all receive even favor upon favor because of his goodness. It's not something we have done. Now, I suppose you could argue that point and say, well, we have done things that he does have favor upon us. But in either case, we do receive this favor. Now that word favor, number 5484, haritos, appears 25 times in the book of Romans by Paul, 28 times in the book of 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and 55 times in the rest of Paul's writings. So studying favor in this word, it's a long study, and you can do it by looking up all these words and finding more about what favor is. But it's sort of tied together by Peter in his book, 1 Peter 1:13, favor being brought to you in the revelation of Jesus Christ. This is the greatest favor that we have, the revelation of who Jesus Christ is in our lives. And then it continues, didonti simia ke terata geneste via ton hieron avtun. The favor of granting signs and miracles to take place through their hands, through the hands of the disciples. Signs and miracles. We all know what miracles are, but signs is a little bit different. 4592, semia. Genesis 1:4 has a first place where it mentions signs. It says, and let them, that is the luminaries in the heaven, be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. So different signs when we see the stars and the moon and so forth. Over the centuries, we see this by many civilizations using all the luminaries of the heaven as a sign of something. In Matthew 12:39, Jesus says, and a sign shall not be given it except the sign of Jonah the prophet. So this is an action of Jonah being in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. And the Jews would not be given any sign except for this saying. In Matthew 16:3, Jesus says, but the signs of the times you are not able. So things that are going on. Today I look at 1948, Israel became a nation. All the things now are focused on Israel and the United States in this war against Iran. So the signs of the times, and I look at these and compare them to things in the Bible of what it says. Matthew 24:24, Jesus says, for false Christs and false prophets shall arise, and shall give great signs and miracles, so as to mislead, if possible, even the chosen ones. So we have to be careful of the signs and the miracles and make sure that they're from God and not from the evil one who is going to be given special powers, we're told in the book of Revelation. Matthew 24:30, it says, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in the heaven. Now what that sign is, hard to say, but Constantine the Great saw the sign before he attacked on some bridge, but he saw the sign in hoc signo vinces, which is was in Latin, by the sign conquer. But now I told a Greek person this, and they said, well, no, it's not in hoc signo vinces, and they said it's and they gave it in Greek. They wouldn't accept the Latin. The kiss of Judas was a sign to the men to arrest Jesus in Matthew 26:48. Now you can go on and study this word for signs also along with favor. Then in 1:4 it continues, Eschisti they to plethos tis polios, and the multitude of the city was split. ke imen isen sin tis Iudeis, and some were with the Jews, they sin tis apostolis, but some with the apostles. Verse 5, os the ageneto, or me, ton ethnon, and as there became a movement by the nations, te ke Iudeon sintis arkusin avton, and also of Jews with their rulers, ivrise ke lithovolise avtus, to insult and to stone them. So didn't stone them to death, but apparently they threw rocks at them. A big brouhaha between with the Jews and the people, the Jews of the nations. And then in verse 6 it says, Sinidontes katephigon istas polis tis lycaonias. And having been fully conscious of it, this wanting to kill them, they took refuge in the cities of Lycaonia. And that was a part of central Turkey of today. At that time, it was part of the Roman Galatia area. Lystra and Derbe are cities you'll go to here. It says, Lystra ke Derbe, ke tin perihoron, and the places round about. And this was a flat area that was a plateau with not very many trees, were basically a pasture land for the animals. And then it continues and says, Kaki isen evangelizomeni, and they were there announcing good news. So now they're in Lycaonia, and we will continue where the city of Lystra was the first city that they went to, and we'll go to the map again and end it with there. So here they're at Iconium, and now they're in Lystra right here, and that's where our next section will begin.